of owning a cafe and other heroic deeds by Beware the Tistero. Chapter 57. Operation Treat Catman. Waking up on Sunday morning, 4:55, no rest for the wicked, Shouta did what he did every morning. He rolled off of his futon into a set of push-ups, then sit-ups before standing to stretch and flowing into his favorite kata. Once done, it was off with his jogging pants, on with his shorts, black tank top, and new sneakers. The shorts had long since been washed from when he'd worn them to go up against All for One. He'd have to invest in another pair or two soon. He may as well go to the mall later, hadn't he? Perhaps his boys would want to come along. He'd be sure to ask. His old sneakers, sadly, had been too scratched and covered in dust to salvage. He'd be sure to bill Shigaraki-san for them, too. Then, once dressed, he shoved his hair up into a messy bun, it was too damned hot not to, attached his cell phone to its bicep cradle, and left his room, a cursory listen in on his teens, both suffering fewer and fewer nightmares, both snoring peacefully. He made his way down the back stairs.
"Good morning, everyone,"
he greeted fondly, his dark eyes roving around the sleeping crates where many of his feline family members were still curled up or stretched out. Most of the juveniles, however, alongside Hahue, who always perked up at his approach, were very much awake. Smiling, he quickly refilled their water dishes, mixed up fresh breakfast bowls, and checked that the litter trays were cleaned out and ready to go. Before he opened the crates and helped the older cats down to the ground. He'd been amazed and incredibly grateful when all three of the boys who lived with him assisted himself and Tomoko when it came to the dirtier joys of pet camp. This had become a more enjoyable part of his morning ritual as of late. The enclosure was secure, the aircon was running in the cafe from 5 on, and the felines seemed to enjoy having their little habitat to themselves in the mornings. For any cat that wanted to sleep had ample soft spaces to choose from after they'd finished eating, whilst the younger ones could frolic, play, and enjoy themselves instead of being cooped up in their sleeping spaces. Then, his fingers offering various forms of scratching, stroking, and petting, he eased his way out of the maintenance room's door. Batskatsugo, the rambunctious sneak, had tried to follow him, but he'd been able to gently scoop him back into the room. So cute! He checked on the cafe proper, switched off the alarm, and made his way outside. Damn! How was it still so hot when the sun had only been up for an hour? It was illogical, irrational, and made the thought of running almost unbearable until... "Morning, Shuni!" Smiling and throwing up a wave, he jogged over to where Hitoshi and Izuku, both already stretching and raring to go, waited for him whilst Denki, adorable, stood beside them, half asleep, his eyelids opening and closing a little too rapidly as he yawned.
"Denki-kun,"
he chuckled.
"are you alright?"
"Fine," the tat replied after another wide air-gulping yawn. "Surely,
"That it is."
he grinned.
"Are you sure you're okay to join us for our run?"
he furthered, whilst the other tat snickered at the blonde's continued yawning. "You betcha!" the child replied with an enthusiasm he clearly didn't feel, his hands clapping at his face in a vain attempt to wake himself up. "If I want to be more like them and improve myself, then I've got to put the work in, right?" he asked before rolling through a full-body shake. "So yeah, come on, let's do this!" 15 minutes into the run, his tone full of praise for the young Kaminari having tried his best, Shouta shouldered him into a piggyback carry, and they kept going for a further 15. The boy, formerly a little crestfallen and defeated, cheering him on as they raced to the finish line of his cafe home. "Yay! We won! We won! We won!" The lightning quirk user cheered, whilst Hitoshi and Izuku, such good sports, their tired smiles genuine if a little rueful. He could swear that he'd heard his ward chuff out, "You won too, huh?" panted and gasped their way to the door as he gently lowered their friend to the ground, snagged his keys, and unlocked the door to let them all in.
"Okay. What would you like for breakfast?"
"What? We get breakfast too? That's awesome!" Denki chirped as he and the others clambered into the second booth. "I'll have anything you're willing to make me, Shoni, 'cause everything you make tastes great!" he preened. "All of that running made me super hungry, you know!" Snickeriggy ruffled their hair before walking through the privacy gate, which fenced off the service area, and entered into his primary domain, a fond sigh leaving him as he washed his hands, snagged his apron, and got to work. He'd already made some onigiri the night before, They'd become a family favorite. He couldn't wait to share some with Kimiko once more. She and Hitoshi had a video call scheduled for 1500. And so, instead of the usual tamagoyaki he made, he'd grabbed the chive plant from the service windowsill and set about making French-styled omelets. These were quicker to make, and he'd be able to use up the rest of the cheese he'd purchased from a trusted supplier to try. The dairy product had been becoming more popular since the 21st century in their formerly lacto-restrictive country, and he found it, yes, although calorific, it tasted good and had nutritional value, so why not?
Damn, what smells so good?
Chuckling, his eyes turning away from the hot pan, his spatula carefully puncturing and shifting the cooked underside to allowing the still runny top to sluice into the pan, Shouta regarded Tomura and Dabi as they stepped into his workspace from their apartment stairway.
Would you like your omelets, with cheese or without?
He asked. He had 2 pans on the go at once, one with the salty, crumbly extra, and one just with herbs, salt, and cracked black pepper. He was going to give the tots a taste of each to see what they thought.
With, thanks.
His oldest teen said with a nod.
I'll go pour us all some drinks. You want coffee? You're a lifesaver.
He replied fondly.
What about you, Tomura? I can make you something else if you like.
And you would do that, wouldn't you, Captain?
He chuckled.
I'll take mine without, please.
He said, his crimson eyes watching him working, his expression a little sheepish.
Since you're teaching them all the tricks of your trade,
he edged,
would you mind if I started joining in?
Mind.
He laughed snorted whilst carefully folding the first batch over.
I'd be thrilled.
He replied sincerely.
We'll get you a cap and apron. The works.
He furthered with a pleased grin, his words causing the other to blush a little.
Thanks, I'd like that.
The different breakfast treat had gone down well. They'd chatted, the tots had been more into their phones than usual, not that he minded, and strangely, the mainstay of their talks had revolved him. What he liked, his family, their friends, cats, bargains, rationality, and salty licorice. What he disliked, poor quality ingredients, deep-fried foods, bullies, humidity, riddles, and disingenuous people. His favorite color, sakura pink, it reminded him of his mother. His opinion on different foods. Even though he mainly made and sold sweet things, he preferred savory. Jelly and nutrient drinks, though, they were the future. If he was a tree, what kind of tree would he be and why? An apple tree. That way he could give people shade in the summer and rain cover in the spring and autumn, whilst providing a useful fruit that people could eat or turn into drinks. They also didn't tend to get chopped down for timber, could grow in most climates, and helped to feed bees. Because bees needed help, too. Chuckling to himself at the randomness of it all, he'd waved Denki and Izuku goodbye and gone to shower himself. They were back off to Inko with a few leftover onigiri to share with her. They would get showered, change their clothes, and come back for the self-defense lesson at the yoga studio at 10. Who knew that having 2 bathrooms would be such a good idea? For as he got himself ready for the rest of the day, Hitoshi could do the same at the same time. A very useful, a practical, especially since the tot very much wanted to go shopping with him later. In fact, all 3 boys had stated that they'd be up for an outing to the mall, which was great and not particularly unexpected. However, after some obvious colluding via text messages for some reason, he was soon told that Katsuki, Eijiro, and Mitsuki would be joining them alongside Inko, Izuku, and Denki. Oddly, Tsuyu and Ochako had apologized for not being able to come with them. They were going to the mall, not an important outing, weren't they? How strange, how illogical to apologize for such a thing. And yet he found himself texting them back and assuring them that they didn't need to worry. That it was just a trip to the nearest shopping outlet. Had the boys somehow made it out to be something exciting? What an irrational thought. And nothing more. But as 10 rolled around and his stats trained, he'd forgotten about the strangeness of it all. Moto-sensei had been thrilled to know that he'd been teaching them in his preferred art, and was eagerly awaiting their details so he could sign them up to Tokyo's awarding body for registration. They'd train in Musutafu and only travel there for assessments and tournaments, though. That was until they'd made their way to the mall itself.
What's with the interrogation all of a sudden?
He'd asked, his tone amused and bewildered.
I just need some new shorts and maybe something a little more fancy for tonight.
He'd shrugged as the group crowded him.
So I was going to start at the discount outlet and...
Now!
Mitsuki cut in, her arms folding imperiously.
Okay, everyone, listen up.
She called.
Debbie and Tamara, here.
She said after fishing out a large bag of coins from her purse.
Take the kids to the arcade. My treat.
She ordered, the teens blinking but nodding and taking the pouch of 100 and 500 yen coins.
Wait a second, please, let me...
No!
She interrupted again, those crimson eyes staring him down amidst the light hustle and bustle of the relatively quiet shopping center.
Have fun, Jimmy Dan. Oh, and don't forget to go visit those other places he talks about, okay?
She veritably chirped, and then the children cheering, off they went.
Okay, Nestor, you're coming with us.
The blonde stated with a nod, and to his continued befuddlement, Ingo had linked his right arm, whilst the domineering Bakugo linked his left, the pair essentially
marching off with him.
What is going on, exactly?
He asked, his tone hesitant as the outlet section of the 5-storied area was moving further and further away from him.
We are going to ensure that you're suitably dressed for your evening with a major celebrity, sweetie.
Mitsuki told him, her smile determined.
As our resident cat dad, it's important that you look the part, for the community's sake.
She purred, her eyes sharpening. Shit, she was using his own tactics against him, but he couldn't let them waste their hard-earned money on him, not on clothing he'd probably never, or rarely at least, wear again. Sure, the sentiment was lovely, beautiful. In fact, however, he really couldn't allow it. Think, Shouta, you socially inept moron! Think! He ranted internally, his eyebrows creeping towards his hairline as they ended. He shuddered. The designer clothing district! His eyes shrinking in veritable horror at the dolled-up mannequins, snooty shoppers, and beyond illogical price tags.
It's not as though I'm not grateful and flattered, really.
He tried.
But...
Okay, I really didn't want to do this.
The semi-retired pro sighed, her beautiful face suddenly really, truly serious.
But you've left me no choice, she added. You brought this on yourself, Inko-chan, if you would.
Blinking, he made his first big mistake of the day. Oh, Sho, why won't you let us love and look after you when you've done so much for us? For there, in all of her, it had to be a quirk, one that Izuku had inherited. Tearful glory, stood one of the first people he'd gotten to know all the way back in May, her hands clasped over her chest as she sniffled, those stunning emerald eyes flooding and overspilling with tears. God, fucking damn everything! Jerkily turning his back to a preening Mitsuki, he just about managed to grate out, "You're despicable," before he caved and brought the wonderful woman in for a hug.
Please stop. I'll let you treat me, alright?
Wandering into a high-end store with an actual tailor had made him want to dig a hole in the ground and bury himself in it. Ah! Taylor-san! Hello! And as he'd been dragged inside, he was beginning to feel deeply irrationally betrayed. His hair was a mess, though clean, and he was just in his standard black jeans and a plain gray t-shirt with his everyday leather ankle boots. Bakugo-san, what a sincere pleasure to meet you in person. Please bring your young man this way, alright? For as illogical as it seemed, the woman had clearly conspired and booked an appointment in this boutique beforehand. A boutique which hosted predominantly Western brands with suits, waistcoats, belts, shoes, and ascots everywhere you looked. The carpet was thick and plush. Classical music ghosted through the air. A handful of businessmen with associates were browsing with personal shoppers, and he'd never seen so many shades, textures, and patterns of fabric. My, and you weren't kidding about his size, shape, and features. Ah, Gustavo, come, we haven't known this in our midst. The sales assistants were predominantly men in their 30s and 40s. Their hair was perfect, their nails were manicured, and they seemed to glide around the displays, many of them just as good-looking as the models, stretched across various posters in exotic locations, their expressions reserved and demure. He'd never felt more out of place and out of his depth in his life.
What?
Why? Why? However, when Gustavo, an Italian man with a mustache so outlandishly styled that he was struggling not to stare at it, sauntered over, a tape measure draped across his shoulders, his tangerine eyes approving whilst he smiled at him with way too many teeth, he knew his fate was sealed. Indeed, ladies! Where have you been hiding him? Jojo, bring in the champagne for our guests, and then fetch me the Gucci in navy, the Hugo Boss in charcoal, and the Brioni in mousse pinstripe, if you please. Casting a look back at the women who waved at him with big grins, as he was led quite unwillingly into the changing rooms that seemed to have actual gold fixtures and chandeliers, as they were directed to plush velvet seats and given flutes of bubbles. Shouta resigned himself to this madness. This was something he was meant to enjoy. This was something he was meant to be grateful for. This was one of his worst nightmares come to life, and he had to be thankful for it. Shit! Sneakily entering the mall through one of the service corridors to where a cute, mostly unused seating area resided, Toshinori couldn't help his snicker. The shopping center staff had been so kind, so understanding, and a few selfies and autographs later, he quietly slipped around the austere maze of corridors to enter the quieter side of the arcade. Then, upon arrival, he couldn't stop grinning to himself, whilst he made his way to table furthest away from the wide entry. Because it really was an adorable space with tiny yet serviceable and matching chairs with teeny tables all in varying pastel colors with cartoonish flowers, bees, children at play, and fluffy clouds painted all across the walls. It wasn't that he didn't mind his fans spotting him, however. Just like Shouta, his oldest boys didn't like crowds and fuss. Therefore, since they'd been good enough to meet him, and with most of the wonderful study group in tow, Ingo and Mitsuki-chan, she'd insisted he call her that, weren't in attendance, though, for he'd sent them on another quest that they'd only been too happy to do. He wanted to keep their meeting low-key. But it was a shame that he wouldn't get to see their cat being dressed in clothes befitting him. The women had promised photos, with Shota's consent, of course, and Mirai, too, would be sure to show them both off, but not too much. They'd stressed that to the restaurant he'd be taking the cafe owner to that evening, later. At the thought, once again, he found himself indebted to the boy he longed to connect with and his partner. They'd filtered some treat ideas to him that morning, told him about their shared plan with the younger children, and mentioned on the fly that Show's been staring at his only suit all morning. You guys sure a swanky place is a good idea? He'd replied that Mirai's heart was definitely in the right place, Tomokum. He's ensured that they'll have a private setting, and the food there is honestly delicious. They don't offer muffins, though. Because he knew his sidekick would have thought of everything to make the night comfortable and enjoyable for the selfless eatery owner. He, on the surface, much like Shouta, was stoic, officious, logical, and reserved. However, underneath the facade lay a person who felt deeply, cared greatly, and loved his fellow man above all else. For they talked at length about what Midnight had affectionately coined as her incredible dating royale tournament, of course. Mirai had known, because apparently to everyone except the resident catman, his pining had been blatantly obvious. Within the first conversation they'd shared all the way back in May, when he'd rushed to save someone being sexually harassed by drunken thugs, that he'd been enchanted by Aizawa-san. Because what had he found instead of someone in distress? Someone who was just another citizen he'd been more than happy and willing to rescue. Only an incredibly skilled, unassuming, roguishly handsome, clearly nonplussed young man who had definitely been lifted out of some kind of fantasy and into real life, his strong shoulders shrugging off his help, his hero acts, and jogging away. Jogging away to a sweet little cafe where he'd let him in before his opening time and treated him to some of the best food he'd ever eaten without a second thought. His heart fluttered at the memory, and in a feat that would surprise no one, Mirai had taken one look at him and told him quite bluntly that, "You've fallen pretty hard for this, Aizawa, haven't you? This will become a beyond nightmare if we aren't careful," and proceeded to pick up the muffin order for him that weekend to size him up. he'd returned, impressed. And even though he was certainly interested in ensuring that Shouta had an enjoyable evening, as he thought might be the case, there was no spark between them. Then he'd happily step aside and help him to woo the man. He's in need of a good wooing, I think. Properly. He was truly blessed to have such a dear and wonderful best friend, wasn't he?
He's here! Shh! We're supposed to be incognito!
Blinking out of his thoughts, Toshinori felt a true smile stretch his lips as the teens and Tats, Eijiro adorably trying to keep Denki's beautiful enthusiasm contained, walked into their rendezvous area. The younger children touched whispers full of ideas as he whipped out his little spiraled notebook and cat-headed pen to begin taking notes. "You've done it again with your amazing advice, Shouta-kun," he praised mentally as they began to occupy the little seats ringing his, their hands offering cell phones filled with pictures of various things that they thought their cat dad would like. "My only hope is that you'll realize that you deserve the gifts we wish to give you.